So pepper, that's what we're here to talk about today. Pepper conjures up, for me, lots of images of warmth, aromas, and a biting heat. Pepper also talks of colours: white, black, green, red and pink pepper. Pepper also conjures up, I think, in our minds, exotic places. So the fabled East Indies, India, Malaysia, Tellicherry, which is in southern India. It also brings in countries like Jamaica, Sichuan pepper, so you're into China, Tasmanian pepper, so you're Australia, Penja pepper, which comes from the Cameroon. It also tells us of myths. So there's Vasco da Gama, who went to India trying to find pepper, Christopher Columbus, who went to America to find India, or he actually went to the West Indies. The Spice Islands, then we have names like grains of paradise and passionberry, all of which are exotic as well. But what is pepper? What do we at Steenbergs think of pepper? In its strictest sense, it's a plant. It's Piper nigrum and the Piper species. But really, that doesn't really cut the mustard in the end, because there are lots of other types of pepper, and it's far too narrow a definition, in our opinion, to really define pepper as a group of spices. It's sort of a digital response in an analog world where you don't have pepper and not pepper, you have pepper, which is a group of flavours, really. And that's really how Steenbergs actually thinks of spices. They don't think of spices as botanical things or things that come from different countries. They're really groups of flavours. So I have a more nuanced view of pepper and love the differences as well as the similarities. So for example, if you were to go to Chile, the Mapache people use something called Chiloé pepper, which isn't a pepper at all, but it's something that they use like pepper. And they use it for the bitterness. And it's much fruitier and has no real heat in it. So that gives us an idea of why, I suppose, humanity is after this sort of thing, the peppercorn. One of the characteristics is its bitterness. But pepper itself also changes. There are different types of pepper, and we will obviously go into that as we go on in the speech. So you have the black and red peppers, which are spicy. They have heat and they have pungency. Green is spicy, but it's a bit more frivolous. It's sort of the Beaujolais Nouveau of the pepper world. And then you have white, which is intensely hot, but doesn't really have any pepperiness to it. It does have often a hint of dampness and sweat rugby socks, though. For me, pepper is really a group of natural flavours, as I said. That one thing that they have is they all should have heat. They have spiciness, they have fruitiness, and they enhance the food through starting our sort of digestive process, and they also amplify the flavours within foods. So they're not necessarily complementing it, they actually somehow enhance it. They will enhance a monkfish or a sea bass, they'll liven up chicken, and then they'll sort of lighten a vegetable and give it a bit more bite. The other thing I mentioned earlier was obviously I think they should always have a hint of bitterness to them. In fact, I think spices should always be slightly bitter, because I think that's something we're trying to get into our food when we use a spice. We're getting the heat in and we're getting this little bit of bitterness. There's not enough bitterness in the world sometimes. In food, anyway. It also takes in the whole range of chili peppers. So we go from chili pepper through to black pepper, long pepper, and then at the other end of the scale we'll have something like a Sichuan pepper, which have something akin to heat in it, but it's not really heat. And then we also have at the other end of the scale, we will have aromatic peppers, things like the grains of paradise, which is really a cardamom, so it has cardamom flavours. Why do I call it a pepper? Because it's actually called Melegueta pepper, alligator pepper, and is used as pepper in West African cooking. And then we also have a mulling wine taste, a bakery taste of allspice, whose other name is Jamaica pepper. That's actually what Christopher Columbus found when he thought he got pepper. He actually found allspice. And then we have the bitter fruitiness of pink pepper, which once again isn't a peppercorn. So we've talked about what I think pepper is, but if we're not going to categorise it by botanical name, if we're not going to just do it in an alphabet, if we're not going to use an alphabet and types of cuisines as how do we do it, how do we start to build up a workable menu? How do we sort of unpick pepper to make it something that people can use in their cookery and cookbooks? Chefs can use it, and how can we sort of find completely different ways and pairings of food, I suppose. So the classic pairing that is sort of always unusual is pepper with strawberries, works very well. So how can we find other pairings like that work very well and are sort of counterintuitive? As I said, most people just stick to the alphabet. It's the easy way. Start at A, allspice, and end with Z. There is a Z actually, but in pepper anyway. Jill Norman uses, I don't know where, is she here? There, Jill, you could call it pungent, so pepper is a pungent pepper. And that's the start of it. It is a pungent spice, but there's much more depth to it than that, and that's what we're going to hope to try and do today and show you some of that. It's a bit nerdy, really, what we're going to do. We're going to look at the flavours and the different sort of styles. And it probably doesn't travel very well. It's not really going to work for Tesco's or something like that. It probably doesn't even work in Waitrose or Whole Foods Market. They'll get a bit stuck as well. So if we're going to rethink pepper, how are we going to do it? Well, it's going back to the basics, really, of flavour and food and taste and so on. But first of all, the first impressions, when you look at the pepper, what is its colour? What is its shape? That is a very good start. Is it long? Is it big? Are they small? Are they uneven corns? What are the colours? Pink, red, deep brown, white, green, or some other shape? Is it a pod? Does it have a little tail on the end? And so on. Then we actually smell it. That's the first thing you do. You've looked at it, you smell it. So it's aroma and scent. And what are each pepper's different top notes? Those first scents that you get, senses. Those general impressions you get when you open the pot. Is it peppery? Is it smoky? Is there a citrus flavour coming through? Is it lemony? And then over time, what are the nuances and wrinkles of aroma from the crushed pepper as you crunch it in a mortar and pestle? And you have to remember, aromas develop over time. So you have to let your nose unravel the mysteries. You know, your first impression is a good idea, but that probably doesn't get you to what the unusual pairings are. That will tell you what it'll work with straight up, but what will it work with that's unusual? That's that you need to give it time to develop and get your nose to unpick and unravel the different flavours. And it will also tell you actually how ripe the berries were when they were picked. You might start with a peppery taste, but then you'll get a fruitiness coming through. You might also discover how it's been processed. That sort of smelly sock smell, as I called it, of white pepper actually comes through the processing of the white peppercorn. It's how they dry it. And if they've not dried it very well, which most people don't do, you'll get a mustiness coming through. If you actually take the mustiness out, people then think it's not white pepper. So it's just, you can get stuck by doing it too properly. Most peppers fall from a flavour perspective and aroma perspective in the spicy, herbal, floral, fruity range of aromas. That sort of herbiness, herbiness and floral flavours at the top end. There's no sort of earthiness in it that you might get from a turmeric, let's say. There's certainly no milkiness in it, which you might get from some other spices, not very many. But you will get nuances. There's definitely, in some of the spices that we have today, you'll find there's a lot of citrus flavours coming through. And then sometimes you'll get smokiness coming through. That's probably not a natural flavour, it's just how they've processed it. Sometimes explicitly, by calling it smoked pepper, but also a lot of peppers are dried or helped in the drying process, let's say, by mechanical heating. But one thing that I'm always surprised about in pepper, if you actually try it and really try and unpick the flavours and get through the heat, you'll actually find that there is a slight meatiness to it. There's an animal element to it. And I think most people don't notice it, but I think that's why pepper works very well, not just with vegetables, but also works extremely well with meats and chickens and so on, because it has this umami bit underneath the heat, underneath the pungency. There is a sort of a definite hidden animal in it, I call it. Okay? So you smelt it. That's the first thing, second thing you do. The third thing you do, taste it. There is no better way of tasting pepper than actually eating it. It's not necessarily the most pleasant thing to do, but if you're going to really taste it, you do actually need to put it in your mouth, chew it, and try it. Some of them can be quite unpleasant, but you don't do those ones too often. And not unpleasant as in disgusting, unpleasant as in the sensation is slightly strange. But it is the only, unfortunately, with spices, it is the only way of eventually getting there. And most people choose not to do that. Most people choose to say, right, we'll have it with the food and then see what it's like. But the only way of actually unpicking the flavour is really to just go for it. Sometimes it's probably best not to do it in company because you might cough and splutter, you might lose your voice. But as I said, you do need to do it. But taste is a much less sophisticated sense than the smelling. Our noses, believe it or not, are extremely good and very powerful tools. We don't always know it, we don't always use them, but they are extremely powerful and sophisticated little instruments, or big in my case, quite big instruments. But it isn't, taste is not a very wide spectrum. There are not many components to it, so we need to widen taste. People always talk about taste, but really we want to talk about flavour, and that's the mouth bringing in the scent and the smell. So you don't just eat it, you open your mouth, you let the air in, your nose starts working, if you've not got cold anyway, your nose starts working, you aerate it, and then you get this mix, something called flavour. So you're getting the taste, you're getting the aroma, and that's really how something can be tasted, really. But beyond taste, we also need to go beyond taste, and we need to go beyond flavour, and that's sort of mouth, I call it mouthfeel. And that's where the heat comes in. Heat is not a smell, heat is not a taste, heat is a sensation. And there are other sensations that people are beginning to realise are part of our way of understanding food. I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, fats. Fats are not just about a taste, they are about a mouthfeel through your food. And that is one of the key things that pepper gives you. Pepper must, in my opinion, give you some heat, or something that's attacking your heat sensors in your mouth. And if it's not giving you that, it's probably not really a pepper, but there are some peppers that we're going to talk about that don't really have any heat, but are used a bit like pepper. And this is what I call the attack, the immediate attack, that assault on your senses. Is it hot? Is it a cold taste? Is it a numbing taste? I mean, a good example of a cold taste is something like peppermint. You have a peppermint and your mouth feels cold. That's a sensation, it's not a flavour, it's not a taste. But even the heat sense, but we need to be careful with the heat, because heat can mask flavour. I mean, if you think about chilies are the classic example of that. You can have one of those Nagajalokia chili, which is a really silly hot chili that is really, all you can feel is heat. But if you actually open one of them and smell it, you actually smell ripe bananas. But you actually, if you taste it and eat it, all you do is get heat, but there is this sort of ripe fruitiness coming through. So you do sometimes need to get through that sensation of heat, as I've called it. So first of all, you get an onslaught that can be sharp and fruity, and then as you aerate it, you get its bite. And then there can often be a long tail to it, its aftertaste. For Sichuan pepper, which we do have a type of Sichuan pepper here, that is not a good thing to taste really on its own in polite company, because you basically, it sort of anaesthetises your tongue, and you start sort of slurring your words. But if you don't understand that it's going to have that concept, you're not going to know how to use it. And they don't have heat. Sichuan peppers, they have this sort of anaesthetic numbingness to them. So the tingling of pepper, Sichuan pepper is similar, but as I said, is not a taste, but is very definitely a characteristic of Chinese cuisine. Right, so that is how we categorise peppers. So we start with, at one end, we end out with what we will call aromatic berries. So these are the berries that are used like pepper, but don't maybe have any heat. They might have a lot of spiciness, they might not have any pungency, and they're probably being used for their bitterness. You then get into we categorise it 3 different ways of peppers. So you have the true peppers, which are pungent and hot. You then go into the chili peppers, which we're not going to talk about because it's a different topic, but is just hot with a bit of fruitiness. And then you go into what I call the anaesthetics, which is the Sichuan pepper group. And there are a few other things that go into that group. So grains of paradise I would put into there, and I would also put the Tasmanian. These are berries that have a taste, have a woodiness, have a spiciness, but probably don't have heat. So something like allspice would fall into there. Doesn't have any heat, but is a type of pepper, or has become a type of pepper and is used as pepper. One of the peppers which you haven't got, so I've got some here, which is something called Salim pepper, which is sometimes called Senegal pepper. Sometimes Jamie Oliver called it Ouda pods and is used in Congolese cooking. If it is called Kimber pepper, grains of Salim. It's got loads of different names. More pepper. This is a pod and has little berries in it. When you open it and smell it, it smells a bit like turpentine. Or anything like that, a sort of furniture polish. If you grind it down, you either use it by putting it in your casserole or stew, so it'll be used in the stew, or you grind it down, and you can use it in casserole or stew as well. And it has a woody spiciness to it. It doesn't taste of turps. That's one useful thing to know. It is used in Senegal. They will grind it down and they will put it into their coffee. So you'll have it in a sweetened coffee. They call it, I'm going to mispronounce it, Jer. It's D-J-E-R, which is probably just a transliteration of how they actually say it. So they will put it in, but that's not the name of the coffee, that's the name of the spice. So if you look at that, that's a sort of an unusual spice, and it really doesn't smell I genuinely do. You put the top on and it keeps the smelling. But within the next thing, that will be handed round. The next one in there that you do have is we have something called passionberry, which comes from Ethiopia. I don't know anybody in London or the UK that's really using it in their cuisine at the moment, but certainly the Fat Duck's experimenting with it. Santini's going to use it today, and Core Restaurant are playing with it as well. They haven't actually, as far as I'm aware, none of them are actually using it as a pepper within their food, or they're not buying it from us. So the passionberry has a sort of an exotic aroma, and it has that tail as well. Yeah, but it has a very sort of aromatic, and its flavour, it's definitely got a bitterness to it, but it's soft and slightly velvety and fruity. It works very well with fish.
In your peppermill, of course.
It deteriorates in your peppermill. The best thing is not to put very much in your peppermill, and just tip it in and keep the top on, and don't put it anywhere hot, because basically with spices what you want, the aromas and the flavours are the aromatic oils, so you're trying to keep them in. So as long as you don't put it in sunlight, near your hob, so all the places everybody keeps them really, they always keep it in the hob, and things like that. Keep it somewhere dark and out and cooler. And a bit like the grains of Salim, this is also put into coffee. It's a coffee blend called Kuti. I'm probably mispronouncing that again. But basically, in parts of Ethiopia where it's grown, they will put it in their coffee to flavour it. But don't forget, in their coffee, it will also have a lot of sugar. So it's more like a coffee, if you can call a coffee chai type drink. Right, we're now going to move on to peppercorns, proper peppercorns. So we're now into the pungent and hot peppercorns. I don't know, does everybody know what a pepper vine sort of pods looks like? A punch or a spike or something like that?
Yeah.
I know you do. Right, we've got some here. This is quite unusual. Can I have some of these? If we have some of these white bowls, I can. This is pickled white pepper. Sorry, green pepper, but it comes on something that looks like a spike of almost like grapes. So this is green peppercorn. So So green peppercorns, pepper is a vine. It grows up trees or grows up trellises. It's picked unripe, so when it's green. And then a green peppercorn, the unripe peppercorn, is either pickled, traditionally was pickled to stop it going brown. It can be freeze-dried nowadays, and there are other ways. Basically, you want to... When the pepper is beginning to ripen and beginning to turn colour, just a little bit, so it's still very definitely unripe, they pick it, and that becomes your black peppercorn. So they pick it, you put it out on a yard to dry, and if you leave it for a few days, it goes brown. So if you were to go and get some green peppercorns and not treat them, they become a black peppercorn. If you leave them a little bit longer, you get a white peppercorn, but it's just a slightly more mature green peppercorn. And what they've done on that is they take the outer skin, the pericarp, they take it off the peppercorn. Obviously they're not doing it one by one. You run it over water and then you rub it off. And so what you've got in the middle is you've got the mature heart, sort of the heart of a peppercorn, which is the centre of a peppercorn. And that's where you get the heat. The heat of a peppercorn does not come from the skin on the outside, the heat comes from the centre. So when you take the outside off, you actually lose its spiciness. So most of the spiciness is in the outer pericarp, the outer skin.
So is that really why you're going to crush
it, because it's just heat, basically, and that's how you used to get heat into food. And weirdly, we sell very little white peppercorns. I mean, I think most of it nowadays goes into the salami industry, whereas traditionally it was what people had.
That's a
You just don't get, people don't buy white peppercorns anymore.
My jelly is
Yeah.
But it has heat, not aromatics.
Which is probably, and the other reason I think people do use it is obviously you would put it into a white sauce. But nowadays people like specklediness into their white sauce. A bit like you put a bit of vanilla ground vanilla into a vanilla ice cream to make it look like it's real vanilla ice cream. We like that, sort of, it creates an authenticity to it. The best white peppercorns I think nowadays come, and we've got an Indonesian one which is called a muntok pepper. That was traditionally what the Americans would buy. In the UK we would often buy a Sarawak one, a Malaysian pepper, which would be a white pepper. And it looks, the best peppercorns used to be called coriander white. And if you look at a white peppercorn, it does look like a coriander seed, but it's white. So that's the final bit on it. The next stage, and you don't get this very often, is you leave the peppercorns to mature, and they start going ripe, and they start going red. And you don't get this very often because commercially it's not a very sensible thing to do, because most people don't want it and it costs a lot more money, and you actually have this harder to process. And also there isn't actually genuinely a real demand for it. There is amongst specialists, but not, going back to Tesco's or Waitrose, you're not going to sell very much because they just want black pepper. They just want pepper. What you will have in your bags, and Jill probably can tell us a bit more about this than I can. Oh, this is the is a more mature black peppercorn, which is in a bag like this, which we're going to relaunch later this year, which was Paras or Parameshwaram's pepper from India. This has been left on a single estate for longer to mature. It's from one of two different varieties, and so this is a red peppercorn. It's a completely different, more fruity, a gentler and more balanced flavour than a black peppercorn. We're going to have it, try it today. I think it's just going to be used in, which one's it going to be used in? Cacio e pepe, which is a sort of a pasta with pecorino, and then it's going to be grated on the top. So it's a very, very good pepper.
Very aromatic.
Very aromatic. So you've each got one. There's some slightly different packaging because it's going to be launched in slightly different packaging. This is a pre-launch sample, so it isn't actually available yet, generally. So I don't know if Do you want to open a couple of those and then people can see it? The best thing to do really is to get some black pepper, white pepper and the red pepper and just look at them, and you've obviously got the green pepper there, look at them separately or alongside each other and just see the variation you've got and how different the flavours really are. Personally, my favourite are the black pepper and the red pepper. Not a great fan of white peppercorns.
Too harsh.
And I'm also not a great fan of the green peppercorns. I mean, but they do work in some dishes. But I mean, we used to sell a red pepper that was pickled, which Sophie Grigson used in a few recipes. But we can't get it anymore. We just can't get it. And that had a sort of a real fruitiness to it. It was a great big red peppercorn. It was fantastic. They were from India, and they just stopped doing it. And I think it's simply because, once again, it's if there's no real demand, and it's actually quite tricky to do. And I think no one is willing. Ultimately, no one pays enough money for these things because they don't rate them. You know, I'm not going to pay £7.50 for a jar, even though I can cook with it for maybe 5 years, and they just won't pay for it. So now we're going to move on to different types of real pepper. There are Cuba pepper, which is a tailed pepper. That is a proper peppercorn, but is a different species within the pepper family. That comes from Indonesia. You'll get another tailed pepper, which is Voitsapiferi pepper, or sometimes called Madagascan pepper, which is another tailed pepper which comes from Madagascar, hence it's Madagascan peppercorns. And they all have a peppery taste, these different ones. Some of them have a bit of citrus to them as well. You then have long pepper, which is at least 2 different species. This is a catkin, and is a nice thing. It's a long pepper, and it looks long. It is the old pepper. Probably the pepper that the Romans talked about. They probably didn't have a black peppercorn, so it was probably traded to Britain 2,000 years ago. And that's, if you were to do a proper Roman dish, you should use a long pepper, not...
Sorry, which one are you talking about?
A long pepper now.
Just long pepper?
Just long pepper, yeah. There are 2 definite species. There's long pepper, which comes from India, which is Piper longum, which is long pepper. The other type is Indonesian, which is Piper retrofactum. They are different species. They pretty much look the same, pretty much taste the same. The Indonesian's a bit hotter. And we also have, so I'll hand round, you don't have a sample of the Cuba pepper, but that's the Cuba pepper that you can see has got a tail on it, so it's sometimes called tailed pepper. This one we can hand round is a long pepper. It is a Indonesian long pepper. Just double check. An Indian one will look very similar. It's a bit shorter usually, the Indian one. That can go the other way round. What we have in your bags, in your boxes, is a red long pepper that's come from Cambodia. So that is a very rare pepper. Rare for 2 reasons. One, there isn't much of it about. The other reason is most of it is about is full of pesticides and is really, really horrible and nasty. So it's quite hard to get a hold of. When you taste it, it definitely has a peppery flavour to it. There's a sort of a hint of leatheriness to it, which sounds horrible, but it's actually quite nice. So that's the meatiness coming through. But there's also a lot of fruitiness coming through in it as well. Just going back to long pepper, chutneys I think should always really use long pepper, not black pepper. In chutneys.
Oh, right.
It tastes different, but I think they taste better with a long pepper. So everyone should have in there, if we want to have, some of them can be handed round, the sort of the long pepper, the red long pepper, that people can smell and look at. And you can see how different it is. I don't actually know what species it is. I don't think probably anyone knows what species it is, but it's probably the Indonesian one, just matured more. But you seem to only get the red long pepper from Cambodia or Kampot, Vietnam, that region. You don't get it from Indonesia.
Lovely.
So on this, I'd say it's got a slight honey taste to it as well, the red long pepper, and a bit of chocolate coming through on it. It's because it has a slightly fermented flavour to it.
That would be something worth doing.
I've put Sardinian carousel bread instead, but this is a typical Venetian dish, which is salt cod soaked in milk with garlic, olive oil, parsley, salt and pepper, and it's called bacala mantecato, and it's a sort of fish mousse, and I think this pepper goes really well. There is some more of this very special pepper in this pepper mill, so if anybody wants more pepper, but it's really citrusy and aromatic, and I think it really cuts the salt cod, which is quite pungent, in a really nice way. So there's more pepper here. I'm loath to get. Can we keep our eye on it? Because if it gets mixed with all the other peppers, that's normal pepper. I don't know why they put that on there, because basically things happen automatically and are all about the aroma, and they're more of an aromatic than a pepper, and some of them are all about the pepper and some of them are all about both, so it's really interesting. Which is a typical Venetian dish again, and this is with the long red pepper, which I've got here, and I know that it's been around. It's really gingerbready. It's an amazing, comforting sort of gingerbready pepper that, interestingly, feels so safe and cuddly, and then it really gets you in the back of the neck. Yeah, the story of my life. That's the story of this pepper. So if anybody's brave enough to have seconds, it's here.
Something we like.
Never say never.
And actually, 4 fat rascals in a box.
Menu at an Italian restaurant, a mango prawn cocktail, but I just thought it's my restaurant. Actually, you know what? Because we've been here for 35 years, we're fortunate enough to have, and we installed the computer system very early on in that process. And I think today is the 29th anniversary of the internet, which is extraordinary, because I can actually remember when it first started. But so we have data that tracks our most sold dishes, and our the tricolore is always going to be, in our restaurant, the most popular starter, because when people have no idea what to order, and then maybe with people that they're slightly intimidated, I'll have a tricolore, because at least they know what they're going to get. And this dish here has become right under the tricolore, and I really believe that next year it will have overtaken the tricolore, which is so interesting about pushing flavour boundaries and geographic sort of things.
It's a lovely combination.
And on this is passion berry pepper from Ethiopia, so we've really been around the world, and I think I'm probably going to keep this pepper involved in this dish now. And it's lovely. It's here, we've chopped it up. I want you to see what it looks like whole as well. Have we got any around?
Yeah.
Oh, here it is whole. Yeah, I've got one here. So this is what it looks like whole, and this is what we've done to it with a knife. And it really does smell of passion fruit, and it's got the sort of tanginess. So the other pepper that we tried, the first one with the bacala, was very much citrusy, whereas this really is a sweet, tangy, passion fruity, and it's a lovely colour, I think. It's sort of a pistachio colour almost. I think this would be really nice in a sorbet or an ice cream too. So I'm going to start here and pass them around for you.
No, fine.
Because otherwise it would have been horrible. I fought with the chef to include this because it's cacio e pepe, but I couldn't not have a pepper workshop without including it, but obviously it's not ideal for 30 people because it just becomes, so we've done it in batches. So if you're lucky enough to have it, please start. Sorry to keep boring, but this ketchup pepper is made with this very special black pepper, Wynad, whatever that means. But what
It's the region.
It's the region. Okay, so there you go. But what's interesting for us is that it's a less mature, it's a softer, redder peppercorn that has got a completely different taste. And now, sort of, Axel's actually ruined the ketchup experience for us at Santini, because we're going to have to always make it with this pepper because it just doesn't taste the same. Once you've had this, you can't go back. Usually it says, was it once you've had black, you can't go back. Now, once you've had Wynad, you can't go back to black pepper ever again on the ketchup pepper.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
It's amazing, and you'll see it. It's less shriveled, less black. It's got a reddy tinge to it, and it's just got such a depth to it that black pepper doesn't bring.
And what did you have first? Was it
With peperada, which is again a typical Venetian sauce that's made with chicken livers and a very sort of not fatty salami or cured pork, and my special subject is umami, so this is really dear to me because it's got the anchovies in it, it's got the cured pork, and it's really, I think an amazing sauce, which would also be lovely on bruschetta or something like that. But this is really where it's supposed to go with the guinea fowl. We're using here a Kuba pepper from Indonesia, which again it's such a remarkable pepper. And if we think about Venice and the spice trail and the sort of gateway of where all things meet, I think that just by sniffing this pepper, it really takes you right back to that journey where the East meets the West and all the magic that comes with it. And Gillian knows far more about this than I do, because everything I say is because she's taught me, but Renaissance Italy had a lot of flavours from the East in it, didn't it? And I think that this pepper with this dish really brings it all together in Venice, so I'm going to pass it around. It's very romantic. I think it's romantic, most romantic of all the peppers, and you can really taste it in that dish.
Alligator pepper. This flavour, you won't come across it very often. It's sort of cardamom, but you will. Anyone who drinks beer, real beer, will actually come across it very regularly because it's actually used as a flavouring in beer. It's also used in gin. More of sort of the traditional beers would be flavoured. So when they say it's a spicy beer, it's usually because it's got spice in it. It's not because the beer itself is spicy. So that's that. This starts with the cardamom taste, but then it goes into a very mouth-numbing, tingly flavour as you go through. It used to be used as a substitute for pepper when pepper was too expensive. It's now the other way around.
Bombay Sapphire's the gin.
Bombay Sapphire, there you go. And then the other one, which is going to be in the Zabaglione, is a pepperberry, a mountain pepperberry from Tasmania. It's not a pepper really at all, but it's hot. Very hot.
It's coming. You will taste this mountain berry pepper in it. It's in Steenberg jars. It would be lovely if anyone wants to take a photo and Instagram it, because I love the Steenberg family as if they were my own, and I'm going to tell you a story now as to why. When I first came out with my project, 2008-2009, which was my sort of spice project, it was really a project from the heart that Gillian and Leslie both know, and Gillian in particular sat in my kitchen with me for felt like a lifetime, and we ground and pounded and chopped and tasted, and it was really the unpicking of my whole life and then weaving it back together into something that turned into a book that the Guild kindly awarded me an award for, which I think is one of the proudest moments of my life and wouldn't have been possible without Gillian. And it was really leading from those principles that Italy had, we all know that it's got some troubles now, and it's always has had, but it really is a country full of magic, and the flavours of Italy for me are something very dear to my heart, and all the cultures that have crossed it, from the Middle East and the southern Italy, etc., to the sort of more Nordic flavours of the north. So that's how, and going back to Steenbergs, after I had created this project, a big supermarket that shall remain nameless approached Axel, and my stuff was already out there in the domain, and I really am the equivalent of a grain of pepper in the business that is Steenbergs, a peppercorn, and Axel said to the big supermarket chain, I'm afraid this project feels very similar to something we're already dealing with, and so I'm going to have to pass on that. And it makes me cry now to say that, because that's the man that Axel Steenberg is, and his wife's the same. So that's really important to know, and that's what you taste when you buy anything from there. It's that integrity, and that's why today has happened, because it's just my small way of saying thank you to people who I admire, because they never ever sell out against what is right for things. So that's really important. Okay. It's not on the internet, even this particular one. It's really just, I don't really know why I do it, honestly. I don't think I even make a bean from it, but I just love it. My commercial project has been my umami paste and Bomba XXX, and those things that sell, have gone around the world, and I suppose I'll go down in history as that crazy lady who invented umami paste. But the sad truth is that every supermarket in the world, including Trader Joe's, has done an own label version of that product, and it hasn't been, financially, but I don't really. I never ever started that project for that reason. I started it because, in that time with Gillian in the kitchen, I just started creating this sort of arsenal of flavour bombs that I needed, because I worked here full time and I had 2 small children, and I just needed to be able to. I'm not knocking ready meals, but I don't come from a ready meal culture, and my mother didn't work, and we had food cooked for us, and I just needed to be able to do that. So I used to create these sort of flavour bombs. And then Gillian would come around and I'd say, what do you think about this, and what do you think about that? And that's how it was sort of born, and I'm really glad and proud of that. And it's taken me all over the world, collaborated with amazing people, met incredible people, including yourselves today. And we were talking earlier about the industry. I don't think that flavour should be defined by the industry. I hate it when they tell us to take salt out, and now they want us to put all the calories on our menus and everything. I really believe in educating children from all backgrounds to a high standard, and then allowing grown adults, informed adults, to make their own choices based on the knowledge that we've put in them. And that's my personal thing, and I don't want to get political, but that's what I think. And I think for people like us, we have to stand up for flavour, because flavour, what we eat, is actually the flavour of our lives in the end, and the flavour, the legacy that we leave behind. And going back to not selling out, please eat the zabaglione, because it's really beyond special. So this project is my, I don't know what I am. Am I religious? Am I spiritual? My problem is I'm not very good at editing, and so I have these ideas, and we have to make everything, much to Axel's frustration. I'm like, but we can't leave that one out, you know, it goes on porridge. And he's like, yeah, but you know, Lara, there's already 13 things in the range. And I'm like, yeah, but we have to have that. So when they took that, again, a bit like the Tricolore story, there was one thing that was called angel dust, and they kept on reordering it and kept on reordering it. So what I recognised was that people were identifying with the coloured jars and the angels and that whole idea. So this project that went into Selfridges exclusively before Christmas, that now needs to sort of get out into the big wide world, as do I probably. I spent too much time in here, but anyway, that's a whole different thing. This is a collection of angel dusts, of using all different herbs that come through the Steenberg stable and blended. One thing that identifies my work, and I've been lucky enough to blend with top people all over the world. I spent time with the late Chef Paul Prudhomme before he passed away, and he was very sort of reticent about meeting me, and I think he thought, you know, that I was going to be a bit silly. And in the end we spent a lot of time together blending, because he had a rule that, you know, there was like 4 things max or 6 max in a blend, whereas I'm able to go up to about 15. And I don't know how. It's really, I don't believe that this is something that, I just feel it's something that's been kind of, I don't even know. I just think of it in my head, and then I know what it's going to taste like, and then I do it, and sometimes sort of surprise myself. You know, the flavours are what they are, but they seem to work. And so this idea, I think I sort of did it because I wanted to create those solutions for people, whereby they could also just live that 80-20 lifestyle of coming home and having a lean protein, either plant-based or meat or fish or whatever, and, you know, sprinkle something flavoursome on it, and you know, so that's how it started. And those are the angel dusts that are in the sort of signature coloured jars. And then there are these little wishing salts, which are get lucky, and there's happiness, wisdom, passion, abundance, peace, and love. And it was interesting that at Christmas in Selfridges, people were only interested in passion and love in London. Abundance and wisdom was just left in piles on the shelves. I don't really know what that means. But anyway, so that was that. And then with it, I sort of crossed into a new territory, which is, well, it's not a new, because I had done a range before, but of candles. And I know there's so many candles out there, but these are, I call them angelic culinary candles, and they're all named after the angels. And because I think that food, going back to what we were saying, it's about intention. So sometimes life is really unmanageable, and a plate is a really good place to start, because it just feels contained, and then you can just move out in concentric circles from your plate. So the whole purpose of this project that nobody really knows about, you're the first people I've ever told about it, it's about that thing of lighting the candle, setting the intention. Then you can use your angelic dusts and your wishing salts to bring in, you know, so if you're feeling sad, you can sprinkle some happiness, or if you're grateful for something, you know, that's the idea. So you can either, you can change your mood with your food. I think food does change your mood. You know, we say, what do I feel like eating, don't we? That's what we say. And so that's what this project is about. And it would never have been possible without a family like the Steenbergs family, who will entertain a lunatic like myself, and allow me to mess them about for days on end with all my stuff, and make me tea while I do it. Yeah, thank you to Axel and Sophie and everybody else at Steenbergs.